I've got a couple Oregon-related notes
Okay,
that I could throw at you.
I love Oregon-related notes.
The first would be Joel Klatt did his post-spring rankings yesterday.
Ooh.
He has Oregon number 2.
I mean, who does he have number 1, Georgia or Ohio State?
Ohio State?
Interesting. That's where I strongly disagree.
No, they're on the Big Ten Network, basically. So.
Sure, he is. Yeah, he's a Fox guy. I get that. Not having Georgia the number 1 team, I think, they've lost 1 game in 3 years. They're returning a ton of talent to their team. They have a guy with quarterback who's going to be likely drafted in the top 5 next year. That team is absolutely loaded. And it took a special Alabama performance and a couple of lucky bounces in order for them to not win their 3rd consecutive national title. Because every fiber of my being believes if they beat Alabama in the SEC title game,
they win the whole thing.
They beat Michigan or whoever they would have played, and they would have won the national title, and they would have won 3 in a row. So that's the only. If you want to tell me you think Oregon's slightly ahead of Ohio State because of their offense and the questions that you have about Ohio State's quarterback situation, I'll grant you that. You could maybe argue Ohio State's a little bit better defensively than Oregon, but Georgia deserves to be the number 1 team in the country.
And Brad Crawford of 24/7 Sports has your Oregon Ducks as the 6th best job in college football in 2024 and beyond article. He writes, Dan Lanning had a shot at other major opportunities prior to leaving his role under Kirby Smart, and since helped the Ducks brand soar. Ahead of this Big Ten move, Oregon managed 9 top 15 finishes since it had first hired Chip Kelly in 2009, which spans 4 additional coaching tenures. Resources are in place to win at Oregon, the Nike backing under Knight. State-of-the-art facilities, a unique setting in Eugene that's unlike any other backdrop of the Big Ten. There's a reason Lanning was quick to remove his name from any connection with the Bama job in January. He knows he already has a top-tier job in the sport. And I also saw Steve Wiltfong report that the nation's number 1 safety is set to visit Eugene and eyeing Oregon as a potential destination.
I mean, we've always debated where does the Oregon job rank? Where does it fall in the hierarchy? Is it a tier 1 job, tier 2 job, right? Like, at what point do you get down the list before you say, okay, Oregon's better than that next gig? I think the modern era and what you're allowed to do now and what is legal, I agree completely. I don't know how many jobs I would put ahead of them.
Can you guess the 5 schools ahead of them?
The 5 schools ahead of them, I would say probably Texas. Texas has to be on there.
Ohio State.
Ohio State has to be on there.
Yeah. Georgia.
Georgia has to be on there. Alabama has to be on there.
Michigan?
Nope.
I don't know if I'd go Michigan. I'm just thinking probably a team from Florida.
It's a great program. I was a little surprised it was ahead.
Just
Oklahoma?
Currently. Nope.
LSU?
Program currently.
LSU,
yeah.
Those are the 5 that Brad Crawford said are better jobs than Oregon.
I mean, the knock on the Oregon job is simply that there's not a lot of blue chip talent in your vicinity. That's what makes it somewhat more challenging than a lot of these other places. Texas, all of it's within 100 miles of you. Now, you can go outside of Texas, too, but there's guys in your backyard that grew up dreaming of playing there that are blue chip prospects. Very rarely happens here. But spending money in NIL is the most important thing in modern college football.
Yeah.
And there's nobody you could argue that does it better than Oregon or is more set up long-term than Oregon.
And I would say,
I agree with that ranking.
For Oregon, compared to those top jobs, that there isn't a knee-jerk reaction to a 9-3 season that there is other places.
There will be this year, though.
If he goes 9-3, yes.
9-3 is inexcusable. I hate to say that,
but
it
I
just
mean,
is.
Barring extenuating, I think Oregon is just on the opposite side of delusional fan than those particular. Like in Alabama, if you go 10-2.
Yeah,
they're screaming for your
Look
head.
how Ohio State's treating Ryan Day. Ryan Day has not lost more than 1 game in a season, I believe, his entire tenure at Ohio State, and they want to run him out of town.
And they're like, is this guy the right guy?
Yeah, but okay.
He's been to a national title game.
I'm not saying they're not demand and they don't expect in Oregon. Like, you can't just stink it up.
No.
But they're not quite at that other level of. They'll be a little more grace period. If Dan Lanning's able to pull one off, if he can do what nobody in Oregon, he will have bought himself more goodwill than you buy yourselves at those schools.
Yeah, no, and I hear you, but and I think the reality is they haven't won a title.
I understand that.
That's the difference with all of these other programs.
Oh, for sure. That's why you don't have those expectations.
But in terms of the quality of a job, You have all of the resource, or almost all the resources that you do at those other places. The recruiting is not in your backyard. You got to go hunt guys down. Lanning seems to have figured that out.
Oh, yeah. Well, none of that matters anymore. He might get the number one safety in the next class.
So,
I mean, it's unbelievable.
There isn't quite the same level of insanity in the fan base and boosters and donors that you experience at those other schools. You can actually breathe a little bit.
I think people locally on Twitter would disagree with your takeaway, but that's also
Twitter's
just
not real
Twitter.
Life,
yeah.
The other thing, too, I would say, and I know it stings to some, but there's something about the conference affiliation that I think ups the profile of the job. Like the direction college football is going, we all know the power is feeding into two conferences.
Well, it's consolidated into the Big Ten and the SEC. I think if you didn't have this weird expansion conference death realignment, I don't know if it does, because the Pac-12 had such a good year last year. They had their best drafting year.
It did.
Now, again, I love that we tout how many players they had drafted from their conference. Do you think that many is going to get drafted next year?
No.
If that conference had stayed together? Because so many teams, maybe some coaches stay, don't leave, whatever. But I just think last year was kind of a unique season. It was a great year. We all knew it was going to be going into the thing. That wasn't a shock by anybody.
You had Caleb back. You had Washington loaded with all their team. Both those teams are set for 7-5, 8-4, 9-3 kind of seasons at best this year.
I think given the profile of what college football is, to your point, being in the Big Ten makes it feel a little elevated, though, because of the current landscape of college football.
Which I think makes the job, not that Oregon wasn't a great job and would not be a great job just because of the NIL landscape, but I do think it ups the platform a little bit for you and probably brings you into the forefront of some of these kind of lists that maybe if you're in the Pac-12, you're not on.
Yeah, I mean, maybe if they're not in the Big Ten, if the Pac-12 still exists, maybe they're not ahead of Michigan.
Maybe they're 11th, maybe they're 12th, 9th,
no, I think
somewhere
they're 10.
in there.
I think Lanning is put it at 10, but like to your Ryan Day point, you've lost 3 straight against Washington, and that's what Ryan Day's lost against Michigan.
Mm-hmm.
If you lost 4 this year against that Husky team that's supposed to be down just from a talent perspective, that's when I think you'd start to get a little bit of the Ryan Day stuff.
Here's the unique thing about this going forward, and I do think I'm curious to see how it all plays out. If you lose, like let's say that was the case, Oregon goes undefeated into the Washington game, they lose the Washington game. I don't know how that would affect their Big Ten championship odds or wherever if they would still go to the game. With an expanded playoff, I wonder if we feel the same way about, like, it's still a devastating loss. You never want to lose to a rival. You never want to lose a big game. But use Ohio State and Ryan Day as an example. In a 12-team playoff field, Ohio State would have been in the playoff all these other years.
Yeah, but I think
I'm just saying, like, if you lose to Michigan, but if you end up going to the semifinals and winning a couple of playoff games, do you still have the same level of questioning or frustration with your head coach?
Yes, because the rivalry is so intense over there. But to this one, the more local-ish one, losing this year to Washington.
Oh, at home, yeah, you can't lose that game.
Yeah.
Washington's not going to be as good.
That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, you can't lose that game.
That's the only thing that would get Duck fan, I think, to start kind of saying things out loud of like, wait a minute.
Right.
What?
Right. And the perspective that you need to have there for the Michigan-Ohio State example is that Michigan has only gotten better the last 3 years.
Yes.
And they just won a national championship, whereas Washington is taking a massive step back this year.